Ebuka had always lived in excess. As the only son of a wealthy businessman, he never had to work for anything. Money was always available, luxury was his norm, and consequences rarely caught up with him. His days were filled with fast cars, designer clothes, and extravagant parties. That evening, he arrived home in his usual dramatic fashion, tires screeching as he brought his sports car to an abrupt halt. The gardener barely managed to jump out of the way, clutching his chest in fright. Music blasted from the speakers as Ebuka stepped out, dressed in an expensive tracksuit and sunglasses, chewing gum lazily. He paid no attention to the near accident he had caused, nor to the disapproving figure watching from. Chief Nwasu stood there, arms folded, his sharp gaze following his son's every move. Though in his 60s, he still carried the commanding presence of a man who had built his wealth from the ground up. The chieftaincy cap on his bald head was a symbol of authority, one that Ebuka barely acknowledged. The young man simply strolled past him, unconcerned. Later that night, the air in the living room was heavy with unspoken tension. The television remained off, the silence broken only by the rhythmic hum of the ceiling fan. Ebuka lounged on the couch, scrolling through his phone as though nothing mattered. Across from him, Chief Nwasu sat rigid, his expression unreadable. A video call connected them to the village, where Mama Nwasu's face, still strong despite her age, appeared on the screen. It was then that Ebuka received the news that would change everything. He was being sent to the village. The decision was final. His father had grown tired of his reckless spending and irresponsibility. There would be no cars, no clubs, no soft life. For the next few months, he would live with his grandmother, experiencing the reality of a world he had never known. The idea was absurd to him. He had never stepped foot in a farm, never fetched water from a well, never lived without the comforts of his air-conditioned mansion. But no amount of complaints could change his fate. The next morning, he was on the road, heading toward the dusty paths of a life he had only seen in movies. The journey was long, the roads rough and unfamiliar. By the time the Toyota transporting him pulled into the village, a thin layer of dust had settled on his once spotless designer sneakers. He stepped out, immediately hit by the dry, earthy scent of firewood and distant farmlands. His suitcase felt heavier than usual, and for the first time in his life, he hesitated before moving forward. At the entrance of a modest but well-kept house, Mama Nwasu stood waiting. Her full gray hair, neatly wrapped in a scarf, shimmered under the fading evening sun. Though in her late 70s, she still moved with the agility of someone much younger. Her expression was unreadable, but the slight smirk on her lips suggested she was eager to see how the city boy would handle village. Ebuka barely lasted a day before realizing just how unprepared he was. Fetching water from the well was his first challenge. He underestimated the weight of the bucket at one point. He nearly tripped over a stone as a stubborn goat that moved to attack him. Food was another ordeal. Used to restaurant meals and imported snacks, the thick village soups and spicy dishes overwhelmed his taste buds. He forced himself to eat under Mama Nwasu's watchful eyes, but the moment she turned away, he grimaced. There was no Wi-Fi, no air conditioning, no luxury. Days passed slowly, each one more exhausting than the last. One night, frustration got the better of him. His phone was dead, and without a charger, he felt completely cut off from everything familiar. Boredom gnawed at him, driving him to explore the house in search of something to occupy his mind. That was when he noticed the small wooden box tucked under Ma's bed. Something about it drew him in. He hesitated only briefly before pulling it out. A thin layer of dust covered the lid, suggesting it had been there for years. He wiped it off and flipped it open. Inside, he found baby pictures, old letters, and worn-out documents. He shuffled through them absent-mindedly, until a baby girl barely a year old, her chubby cheeks frozen in time. He turned it over. The ink on the back was faded but still readable. "My sweet daughter, I hope you are safe." A strange feeling settled in his chest. His fingers trembled slightly as he dug through more papers, his father's name appearing on one of the documents. His heartbeat quickened as the realization began to dawn, then a sudden movement behind him. He looked up. Mama Nwasu stood at the doorway, her eyes fixed on the open box in his hands. There was no anger in her expression, no shock, just a deep, quiet sadness. And at that moment, Ebuka knew. This was something his father never wanted him to find, and it changed